I'm poet and writer Kay Spivey. I want to just have kind of a frank discussion with you about something that I think is really prevalent in the literary community, and the discussion gets brought up every now and then, and so everything in this video is just going to be my own opinions on the matter, not having to do with anything else, not in reference to anybody else's takes on this, just my own personal opinion about something that is hugely prevalent and that we talk about maybe not even enough, and that is, should you pay literary magazines to submit your work to them? I've been doing this a really long time. I've been submitting work for publications since roughly about 2008. Here and there, different things. I was definitely submitting work when Submittable really became a thing. And I remember when it was always a free submission service, and I remember when it started charging publishers and they started using submission fees as kind of their way of getting around that, as having that particular part of their overhead covered by the people submitting, and finding that very frustrating, obviously. But I want to talk about like why it frustrates me, and also like if I think this is something that is like ethical. But again, all my opinions, you're welcome to have your own opinions. Go off in the comments, let me know. Like, I can link some other people's opinions about various things down below if you're interested in hearing more about it. I know this comes up on Twitter on a cycling basis, but yeah, fees for submission, I'm against them on a base level. If a literary journal of any kind is asking you to pay for submissions, and that's any kind of payment, and they range so big. Usually, like, the common one now, with Submittable especially, is they'll ask for about $3 US. It's probably slightly different elsewhere, but it's $3 US to cover their submittable fees. So that'll be like a submission fee rather than a reading fee, which I think we've had the discussion enough that most people feel like a reading fee is not very ethical. But a submission fee, about $3. And it can go from there, that's kind of the low level, up until there is a very popular one that comes up every year that I always get an email about, where there is significant prize money in the one I'm thinking of, but it's not the only one, and not all of them have significant prize money. But you can submit 3 to 5 poems usually for a grand total of like $20 to $25. Yeah, 3 poems for $20. Whoo! And then potentially get the prize. There's only one first place winner in most of these, and maybe the second place in some of them will have a prize that's significantly less. A lot of them, only the first place winner will get a prize. And yeah, $20 to $25 for 3 poems. I'm fully against that. I don't think that's something you should do. But again, I'm going to talk about why. When a literary magazine charges a fee, there are many things that they're trying to cover. So obviously, Submittable charging them a fee, they're trying to just cut that cost out of their overall overhead costs. So having the submitters take care of that, the submitters are the ones who are incurring the cost for them, so they're trying to then cut that by using the submitters. 99.99% of those people are not seeing any money in return. They're putting in money and they're just putting it into whatever literary journal's overhead, and they're not seeing any of that back. They're not getting any kind of reward of any kind from that. A reading fee would then be for someone to look at it, for them to pay the person who is sitting down to look at the work, usually in the slush pile, or maybe it also includes the editors. This is one of the things that's like really shaky ground, because you should be paying the people who are working to put your literary journal together. Like, ethically, you should be paying people for their work. Having unpaid interns do all of that kind of work isn't really great. Like, most people can't do that. Most people can't afford to just work for free, and even working for the love of it, most people can't do that. They don't have the time, they don't have the resources to make that happen. And so they do need to be compensated for their time, absolutely. People who work really hard putting together beautiful literary magazines, they should be compensated for their time, absolutely. However, you run into the sticky situation of all of these people submitting being the ones covering that cost of hiring editors, of hiring slush pile readers. And if the people submitting to your magazine are the ones covering all of that overhead cost, as someone submitting, you need to think about that their overhead for hiring the editors and readers and all of that is not getting covered by them selling the actual product, the product that you paid them essentially to put your work into. They're not selling enough copies to cover the overhead of their staff. They're asking you as the submitter, as the one that they are then they're getting a piece of the product from, they're asking you to cover that overhead, which means that, and this is especially true if they don't pay for the people that they publish. Well, because if they pay the people that they publish, some of that is also going back to paying the people who go into the literary magazines. So if you've written a poem that works for them, that they like, then some of that cost that everyone put into, let's say, like the pool of the reading fee, goes back to paying the creators, paying the people back, usually a very, very minuscule amount, usually $10 or less, let's be honest, for most literary magazines, if they're just paying per publication. Sometimes more, absolutely, sometimes more. I think $50 has become more common, but for poetry, $10 is a little common. Seeing something over 100, aren't you lucky? That's rare, unfortunately, especially because in order to get published, you're probably doing submission fees to multiple places, right? Yes, we're getting towards the problem. But anyway, if they are not paying, then that means that they're taking the work from you that you've created, that many of you have created. They're taking that work, selling it, and not selling it to enough people to then cover their overhead and pay anybody. They're asking you to do all of that. And at some point, it becomes a vanity press. You're paying somebody to put your work in front of nobody. If they were selling enough copies of the literary journal that they've put together with all of these people's hard work, they'd be able to cover their own costs. And if they're not covering their own costs, are you getting any value out of having paid them to publish your work? Because not enough people are seeing it to then spark any kind of career for you. Now, if they are paying you, then at least you're then getting some kind of kickback should you be published with them. And again, it's usually quite low, so it usually doesn't really offset the costs. If you sent one poem to, let's say, I mean, on average, people are sending out poems to like 20 places. Let's say you sent it to 5 places, and all 5 of those places had a $5 submission fee. Well, if you're only getting $10 back for the one place that publishes your poem, you're not even making up all of those reading fees. So there's that problem. And the problem really is that it kind of becomes pay to play very, very quickly. There are times when I have had $20. I was like, yeah, I can invest $20 to send out my poem, especially to one of these contests with like big prize money, who maybe have someone who you really admire and look up to. Some like fantastic poet is the one who's going to be doing the reading, who's going to be selecting the poems to get your poem in front of the eyes of someone that you really, really admire, even if it's just 3 poems for $20. There have been times in my life where I had that money. And there have been many times in my life where I absolutely could not justify putting a $3 submission fee towards anything. And that will kick you out of a lot of opportunities. There are so many literary journals, especially ones that have any kind of like name recognition or prestige. So many of them you can't get into without having that money. So during the times when I have not been able to spend $3, $5, $10, $20 to submit poetry, I was just completely cut out from the potential of being published by tons of especially very recognizable poetry journals and literary magazines. I think it's very easy to see where I'm getting with that because it's pay to play. There are a large subset of people who are simply cut out, who are simply not allowed to play the game, who are not getting published. Other routes are of course available, and I think that is part of where the prevalence of Insta poetry comes from. Having an opportunity to publish your own work gets you around a lot of these submission fees that many of us cannot afford, cannot be putting that forward, especially when the chance of you getting anything back, the chance that my $3 is going to turn into $10+ when they finally choose my poem, if they ever choose my poem, you know, the risk and reward are not equal enough to make it worthwhile. The risk is too high. The possibility of getting published is so low. There's so many people submitting. And so it does kind of cut out a lot of people who are struggling, a lot of people who would love to have their poetry read, who would be a perfect fit for the magazine. They just simply aren't allowed. And so it's a major gatekeeper. I have another video about gatekeeping in the literary community, the poetry community. Like, that is a major gatekeeper. Money is a huge factor. Money, if you're not worried about money, it's because you've got money, you know? Like, if you don't, it is one of the most stressful things. And the problem being that there are so many literary journals. So many opportunities out there. So there's the illusion of so many opportunities. But the reality is, so many of the ones that have the kind of prestige, have the kind of name recognition, have the kind of publication payments, who pay their poets, who pay their contributors a decent amount, so many of them already have that barrier because they found that they can cut some of their overhead costs by having the submitters take care of that for them. And again, how many are using the same model who don't have that prestige, who don't have the clout that then the name recognition would help advance your career, or that they're choosing to pay you after they publish you? Like, how many who don't have any of that are using the same model, and then people are putting their money out because it appears to be part of the system. It seems like it's something that you just do, that just everyone does, and are basically just throwing money away. There's so little value placed on the writers that we create a product that's being sold, that like they are making money off of. They're selling a literary magazine, they're making money off of your work. You've created the product for them, or a piece of the product in the case of most literary magazines, and they are expecting to make money back for themselves, but not to then pay you for the work. And they're expecting you to pay them instead. And I think that is just, oh, there's something that's just not right about the model. And I feel like it comes from the same place as these big publishers for like novels. If you sell a novel, that they are paying in advance and they're keeping a portion of the money. Like, this is how just a normal publishing situation would work. They're giving you a small cut and they're keeping a large portion because they're covering all of the overhead, they're covering, you know, the print and all of that, and some of that overhead includes marketing. Well, if they're expecting the writer to do the marketing for their own product, but not giving them then the cut that should have gone towards marketing, well, they're just then pocketing extra money and having you do extra work. Like, it kind of sucks that as writers we're kind of treated like trash. Is that fair to say? Like, if you stop and think about how some of these things work, we're kind of getting taken advantage of on a couple fronts, and it's frustrating that it's like so prevalent, that it's become such a natural thing, that so many places are doing it. And so many places are doing it because it's a normal thing. They look at everyone else's model and they're like, okay, this is how it's done, I'm gonna do it. Like, they're not necessarily going into this with like a predatory mindset. I don't think that's the case. In most cases, I really think they're like, this is the business model, this is how we do it. And they're not thinking about it in terms of the fact that, like, rather than have submitters covering all of their overhead, maybe they're just not a very good literary magazine. Maybe they're not selling enough copies. Maybe they're not putting their money into the correct places. Like, there's this idea that we want lots and lots and lots of independent literary magazines because then we have a lot of different kinds of content, a lot of people covering different ground. But at the same time, it's not a matter of oversaturating the market. It's a matter of all of these people doing something where they're all taking in money and they're not then distributing the money back out, that the people who are actually doing the work, actually doing the writing, are not getting paid, and that that's being seen as a fair model. And so this is starting to perpetuate, and it's so not lucrative at all to be a writer. It is one of those things where, like, you see nothing and then maybe luck will hit you and you'll see something, and a few select people see a good amount. But for the most part, you work really, really hard for beans, and not all beans are magical. It becomes this like huge problem, and I think there is an issue with it. There is an issue with publications being like, hey, we can cut our costs up front, we can pocket a little more of the money, put in a little less of the work, and just have the writers do more of it for us. Like, there is an issue with that. There is an issue with them being like, I want to sell the product that you created. I don't have a product before. I want to take your product and I want to sell it. I'm gonna make it beautiful, I'm gonna make it great, but I'm not going to do the extra. I'm gonna have you do a lot of the work for it that historically you wouldn't have done, writers marketing themselves was something that was like fully by choice, that is something that, unless they're creating a contract for you around the fact that you are then being expected to take on a large portion of the marketing and thus should get a higher percentage. If you have a great agent who's figured out to do something like that, I do think that's something more agents should do. If that's going to be a normal part of the model, authors should be making a larger portion of the money if they're expected to do the larger portion of the marketing. Doesn't that make sense? I feel like it makes sense, and I'm sure publishers would be really, really pissed to hear me say that if they were listening, but they're not, so I can say it. If they're already in their portion that they're taking, supposed to have a set amount for marketing and they're just not doing it, then shouldn't that go back to the author if they're the ones who are expected to do it? And it's the same thing with publishing for literary magazines. Like, if they're going to not be able to cover their overhead, they're asking you to do it, they should be paying you a larger portion. Anywhere that is not paying but is asking for a submission fee, I think they should all be shut down, honestly. I don't think that's ethical in any way. I don't think you can ask someone else to pay your overhead, and I don't think that's right. I don't think straight up, if you are looking to publish with literary magazines and they ask you for a payment and they do not offer payment to you in return upon publication, do not go with them. It is not right. It's not right. They should at least be paying the people that they are publishing, the people whose work they've chosen, if they're going to ask for any kind of submission fee. Straight up, hard line. And I still think that a literary magazine who is doing well enough to be worthwhile for your work to go to, for it to be worth your time to send your beautiful creation to, if it's worthwhile to send to, they won't need someone else to cover their submission fees. They will already be covering them by the amount that they're making off of the product they're selling. And they will also be able to pay for the people who are helping to make that creation happen. And that includes the writers, and that includes the editors, and that includes the readers. Like, all of you should be getting paid. The business model should be sturdy enough. And I think if a literary magazine is not sturdy enough to be able to do all of that and not have to ask their contributors essentially to pay in order to play, then I don't think their business model is good enough to stay alive. And I think that's something we need to really have a serious discussion about in the literary community. That, like, is it useful to have all these different literary journals if most of them can't even do anything for the community? Like, what value are they adding if they can't pay the people who are working for them? That's where I'm really getting at. And I think there's probably a lot more nuance to this. I think I could probably rant about it for a lot longer. That was like the gist of my thoughts. I just really strongly feel that it's not right for writers to have to pay for everything. It feels like in order to get your foot in the door, you're putting down a large chunk of money every single time. And it's true, you are. You absolutely, in most cases, you are. If you want to enter contests, it's usually 20 to 25 bucks. And sometimes it's 3 poems. Sometimes it's a full book, but it's usually not. It's usually a lot less. In order to submit, just like a group of 5 to 7 poems is pretty typical. You're still putting down like the $3 submission fee. That's not always feasible. That's just something I wanted to talk about, something I think we should all be thinking about quite a bit more. But that's all gonna be all from me today. If you like this kind of video, please like and subscribe. Please leave a comment down below. Tell me what your thoughts are about this. I feel like this is something we just cannot talk about enough. That's something that needs to get fixed. Also, check out my Patreon listed down below, and I will see you again very soon. Recently, I'm posting AuthorTube/BookTube/PoetryTube content on Wednesdays and extra fun stuff on Saturdays. So I will talk to you again very soon. Good luck to you. Good luck to all of us. Bye.